Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to Dice and Mind, a monthly podcast in which we explore the meaning of life through the lens of RPGs.
We're lifelong friends, a couple of guys in their 40s who along the way had families and became professionals. Over the years, we've talked about pretty much everything. But recently, we realized we both had an interest and some history with tabletop role-playing games. So,
In each episode, we will consider everyday stuff like science, religion, philosophy, and economics, all through the lens of a specific role-playing game and its dice mechanic. For example, what would I have to roll in the Edge of the Empire narrative dice system to get that promotion at work?
or would getting that paper published give me advantage on a subsequent D20 roll in Dungeons & Dragons?
If I were DM, likely not. But join us now and every month to think deeply, geek out, and explore how RPGs make the world just a little bit better.
This is
Dice in Mind.
So in our last episode, listeners, we went through and started talking about first edition of D&D. Today we're going to wrap up that discussion. Our impressions of the product, our impressions of first edition, and then do really a straight comparison in terms of our experience in looking at the material between first and fifth edition. We are not going to touch second through fourth editions. There are people that play a lot of second and third still. Fourth edition has it's a almost political in terms of your interest in it. So let's focus today on our experiences and wrap up our discussion of first edition and then do a comparison. Just so we're clear now, as a reminder, Jason and I haven't played first edition together. I played it a very little when I was younger, and we're talking about this from the focus of the podcast itself, which is how does the mechanic work in terms of how you can relate it, I'm oversimplifying, how you can relate it to reality.
So just to be clear, then we're posers right now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
yeah.
just
so
checking.
if you have a problem with posers, skip right over this episode and head to the next episode, or listen to the last one again and then come back to this one, because you will be intrigued now by how is the word poserish acceptable, or is that too non-academic?
I think for a poser to turn it into
It just is what it is.
It is what it is, right?
Okay.
What do we know?
Yeah, what do we know? So, but I think Jason and I talk about this beforehand, and I think we have some interesting insights into this, looking at it from an outsider's lens, looking in, and not looking at how it plays, but in effect, how does it relate to our experiences with Five, and how does it relate to our focus of this podcast? So, as I say that, Jace, you brought up something very interesting around the material. Now, both he and I have been using the DM guide as our reference as we talk through first edition. So just makes it clear. We mentioned in the past that the player's handbook in fifth edition covers a lot of material for the player and the dungeon master. It's the exact opposite in first edition. You really need the dungeon master guide to be a dungeon master. You're not going to be able to be a good dungeon master if you're just carrying around the player's handbook for first edition. My opinion, I believe it's yours as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So what were your thoughts about, the material in it? And you brought up an interesting point about material coming into it, material leaving, material returning.
Yeah, it's a good question, and we were talking about this off air. To just riff for a second on what you said, I think we probably can all agree, at least you and I would agree, that the 5e material, I'm just going to call it, the 5e triumvirate, right? The three core books, obviously the other ones as well, but the three core books of the GM guide, the player's handbook, the monster manual. It's 5e. They've had so many iterations. They are so optimized in such a good creative way. However, to address your question, And I know I'm flipping pages, so I can't say anything to you now today. But just to put this in perspective, guys, I have in front of me, and Brad's got one too, obviously. This is the reprint we've been talking about of the 1E Dungeon Master's Guide. It was published in well, this copy in 79, but I think, Brad, you were telling me the actual manual is 77. In the end of this one, there is an ad. There's an ad that starts with "The legend lives on," and I just want to read the first brief sentence or two. In 1974, the world changed forever when Gary Gygax introduced the Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game. The legacy of his innovative ideas and the extensive reach of his powerful influence can be seen in virtually every facet of gaming today. Now, as a quick footnote, I think it's only right and proper and honest that we also add and Arneson. But that said, what I just read was written in 79. And in 2021, I'm not sure it's any less true. And so, like, Brad, what you were referring to is so with 5e, one of the I was going to say, guys, that I don't buy very many books, but as I look at my shelf, Brad's giving me the look of liar. I if I counted them, I would have an embarrassment of riches. Not compared to some people I know, but like I bought Tasha's Cauldron strictly because I wanted the canon language around psionics. I've always been interested in psi from a fiction standpoint, a sci-fi standpoint, an RPG standpoint, etc. Well, guys, psionics as a topic is in 1E from 77 in detail, and then it just floated away, and now it's back. And so I just think there are some issues with the staying power of the imaginativeness of Gygax and Arneson and the others, of course, who worked on this. That is the connection. That's the thread that I think motivates you and me, Brad, in terms of why we even want to just do a 1E versus 5E, although it's really not a versus, because neither of us looks at this as antithetical to one another.
Just as an aside, traditionally, Jason and I have not run video during our recording because we wanted to preserve bandwidth and avoid any issues with quality of audio.
Hence, episode 8.
Yes, somebody, no mentioning of names, amongst the two of us got an upgraded internet system, mesh system, internet system. I don't think that sounds right, and I'm a tech guy. Upgraded their internet. And so with this episode, we are now able to talk over video cam. So we're doing these visual triggers as we're talking. So
the downside, of course, is that we can see each other.
Yeah.
But the cueing is much better.
Yeah, but it is different because he and I will talk on video before we record, and then we turn off video. Now we're able to watch and do the body cues, and Jason can tell me not to flip pages or whatever. Going back to AD&D. So you brought up this is an interesting point about psionics, where they threw a lot into the system. And then ultimately, by the time we get to 5e, they are putting stuff back in the system, but it is through additional book material. So in effect, buy Tasha's, get psionics, right? You can find it online. I'm not advocating that. Buy the material, get the material in PDF through D&D Beyond, get the actual material.
And just to interject, I'm sorry, a lot of that stuff was beta tested, or at least play tested unofficially through all the Unearthed Arcana, right, over the past several years to see what stuck and what didn't.
Yep. I was looking through the book, and it's, obvious that they had, obviously we know Gygax and others within that group had an experience, I mentioned this the last time, in wargaming. And then that kind of morphed into what ultimately became Dungeons and Dragons. You could tell that they had a very analytical approach to it just by the fact that how they turned everything possible into a number. For Jason and I playing 5e, I go to page 12 and I see character age and character aging. Now, we talk about age in our adventures as an more of as a point to be
Flavor text.
yeah, and as a DM, I might interject it a little bit just based off of what I know as to how you describe the character to me, but it doesn't affect the mechanic at all. And as such, there's always that little bit of detachment of reality, even though you play characters and we have characters that have different lifespans. Here, I'm just looking as an example. They'll have, races plus, in effect, also based off of race and whether you're a cleric, fighter, whatever the case is. You can generate your age and then you determine aging. And aging affects your ability to play within the system. So I
Like
go
in
back
real life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can make jokes, but I'm not going to. I just find it interesting that this was one of the reasons why you and I looked at Pathfinder. Was originally I thought, and I think I'd sold you on the idea of taking our love of statistics and research and numbers and applying it into a system.
That part is totally true. But you saying to everyone, you sold me on the system. This was a 6-month or more long hard push. I had no interest in Pathfinder. And don't get me wrong, listeners, we're going to get to Pathfinder in about a handful of episodes. We're going to look at both of the editions, but we promise. But I had no idea about Pathfinder, and I finally gave in because I realized it was the only chance I had to roleplay.
and you tried to minimize the cost by buying the pocket edition, the paperback edition of the core handbook. So it was what, 20 something bucks.
Yeah,
and
actually, I actually like the paperback Pathfinders more. I just like the form factor, although it's pretty dense, pretty crammed.
Yeah, but so you've corrected history. That being said, we thought we wanted a crunchy system. It turned out that, and I think it's probably a little more that me than anything is just based off of busyness at work and everything else. Trying to game master a crunchy system for the first time became difficult for me. So I don't even remember the onus on how we changed, but we ended up moving to 5e, and 5e took some of that crunchiness away. It created a little bit more subjectivity.
I think it was your idea. I think it's exactly what you're saying, Brad, that and like we had talked about a little bit of this in our first episode when we introduced ourselves, but I had 4 years ago now, back in 17, I decided to heck with it. I really miss role playing. It's been a long time. I'm just going to get into it on my own. I went back to Star Wars with what I know, did the quote unquote new with FFG, and then you eventually sold. You all can't see the air quotes. You eventually sold Pathfinder, and I think it just became so overly crunchy for us and for you. Like we had been playing for how long, and we were still going back to figure out some roles. And I think you, my friend, came to me and said, what about 5e? I think I could GM this without too much invested. And you were entirely right.
Yeah. It's a very different system. What's the word for it? I find it more colorful.
Yes.
And what I mean by that is I have a lot of ability to generate a story and in effect allow DM prerogative. It just, I think it flows creativity. So for the two of us who haven't lived playing this game, maybe having watched, Jason, you listen to podcasts and have listened to some of them. I've watched video on it. It looked like a game for us to get into outside of FFG. Jason can GM FFG. I took on the idea of GMing a 5G or 5e.
Something you said, and maybe we mentioned it in our last GM corner. I know you and I had talked about this offline. I think we mentioned it, but it's worth repeating. You had observed that had we or either of us when we were like kids, or I mean maybe by college or thereabouts, it wouldn't have mattered, but had we been like introduced to 1E D&D when we were like in junior high or whatever, we might have been much less likely to look at any of this because there was such a steep learning curve for 1E when we were kids, unless you knew someone who could teach you the system.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when I got the red box D&D, original standard D&D, red box basic, levels 1 through 36, with the additional expert companion series, very different to play than this. This was much deeper a dive. They, in effect, this is not the correct way to put it. Everything is created in this environment via calculus. I mean, it literally is down to the crunch. I would argue that this is almost crunchier, and for us to be able to play it, it would tickle the research and the statistical bone, but it would be so slow to learn this. I think it would be too much of a drudge.
It borders on mental masturbation.
Yeah.
I mean, not to push it too far, but it's so crunchy that, like I said to you when my manual came that first day and I started flipping through it, the 1E manual, and I started flipping through it, that it was like, aren't we just looking into Gygax's mind, maybe a bit of Arneson's mind? Aren't like these, some of this has to have been the itch he needed to scratch, because it's not something we would actually need to play a really robust game.
Did he ever? Obviously, this is pre-internet because we were infants or babies at the time. But was his intent really to write this for the general population, or just in effect to write this for his group? He wasn't expecting to have this, at Walden Books or back in the day, or Barnes and Noble or anything.
And he was variably, the whole point is like, they were variably successful between the novelty of the concept, in fact, I was just explaining this, I was driving my not quite 16-year-old was driving me up to one of her extracurriculars, and I told her we were recording, Brad, tonight, and my girls are a little concerned because I'm taking away from Loki time, but we'll get there tomorrow, and Bad Batch. But she's like, oh, so what are you recording tonight? And I told her, and she's like, did you play when you? And I said, I never played as a kid. I played once at a sleepover. And she's like, really? And I'm like, yeah, I didn't know anything about it. In fact, it was really taboo because that was when you had that group of moms who got the papers to sign with them, and this is all evil. And yeah, just with the crunchiness and with the baggage, even before there were the media bubbles like there are now. And yeah, you couldn't just YouTube it. Like when I got into Pathfinder, I jumped into YouTube and the podcast right away, because it's like, what the hell is going on? Because as much as I listened to one of the podcasts, I like, and same with D&D, although I haven't found any I like. Sorry, fans of Critical Role. I've not found any that I really like, but I just couldn't get in. I couldn't make sense of it enough to understand how to play the game. I think I was going somewhere with that, but I think I lost it along the way. So back to you.
No. This would have been too difficult for us as young, and I think there was a stigma with it, obviously.
Yeah.
Growing up to be, and if it was a stigma for us, being the nerds that we are, you can imagine, what others may have thought of it. I couldn't see us playing this until, at the time 5e came out. Now, we have a friend who is probably one of the best game masters I've ever seen, who does a lot of Star Wars gaming. And that's the one that you played with.
Yeah, all props to Scott. Yeah. Just remarkably imaginative.
Yeah, with it's West End, right? West End D6 Star Wars.
Yeah, and now I know he plays a lot of FFG. I've never done that with him.
But that was the game that really got you started when you were in high school and even into early college, right? And
sitting around with Scott and his local friends, who didn't leave town. I was invited. They'd been playing for how long? I must have been at least through junior high, and they would just walk. They were really good to me. They just walked me through, right? Like welcoming anyone new to the table. But I remember my first numerous sessions with Scott and his other group of friends, and they were all very proficient. And I was just trying to figure out again what's going on. And when I finally bought the manual and then started reading and then started like really clicking, it's like, oh, that makes sense. And that was only the West End D6, which is known as an exceptionally clean system. So I have to agree that I think we might have been taken by the content and the concepts, right? But it would have been a tough one to get into.
If you think about every decision, because remember we've talked about this before. If we talk about gaming in the context of real life and how they interact and how they are similar or how they are different. We talked a lot about advantage, disadvantage, and so on with the FFG system. I believe that you could really write real life with the FFG system better than almost anything out there. I still believe it. And I'm not an expert in it. You are. This would take every decision and every nuance about you, height, weight, everything like that, every decision you make, and in effect create a calculation out of it, which sounds cool for the nerd in me.
Until the physician tells you what your BMI is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't get to roll a choice as to having it, whether it's higher or lower.
No.
You know?
It's like no matter what I roll, still chubby.
Yep, exactly.
Yep.
So I think it's, for me, great idea on paper, fascinating read, impractical for us to play versus a 5, even a Pathfinder, which we'll talk about toward the end here. So I still think it's what got me interested in this is someone out on Reddit had mentioned that the DM guide is, I think I mentioned this in last episode, is an absolute mess, disorganized, but it is one of the best reads you could do for role play. And I can't disagree with that, even though it's not a gaming system I would necessarily play.
Yeah, it's there's not a lot of narrative in here, but it's really interesting. Though for these reasons, though, I think, and you tell me if you agree or disagree personally. I know for me, 5e has been a really comfortable, fun fit, and not merely because you're running such an interesting campaign, although again, yeah, there's some GM prerogative, to put it mildly, but because Brad finally found a way to get back at me for a lifetime of friendship
multiple times.
Yeah, although the highlight, really, other than that dragon, which I recently realized was not, and so I'm gonna have to think more about that. But other than that, the highlight was my character lighting those torches and chucking them into the prison window. That was the funnest thing I've done in D&D. I digress, listeners. The point though is I think 5e they have intentionally, and of course it took multiple reiterations, but they have corrected so many of the difficulties of 1e. Now, I think it's fair to say, Brad, we know, like with any new system, or quote unquote new, because it's not new anymore, that there's always going to be pushback, right? There's always going to be pushback, and we respect that. That's just humanity. There's going to be pushback, but like you were saying, how the FFG, or just let's call it the Genesis mechanic, probably is the most nuanced way to simulate real life, although it does have some issues, and we'll eventually talk about that again. We'll eventually probably just do one on the Genesis core rulebook, if not more. But I think the 5e mechanic around the D20 has made it more fleshed out. The things like the advantage, disadvantage, for example, just little tweaks, some big tweaks to the mechanics. Like I'm looking at the GM screen at not just the actions in combat, but the many conditions. And it's still pretty crunchy in the sense of specificity, but they're realistic as much as a high fantasy system can be.
I'm holding up the DM guide for first edition. It is not crunchy like this.
No.
And I would, you go out now in this generation and you can go out to, you know, watch brief things on Snapchat, TikTok, a lot of Twitch videos, you know, Stranger Things had D&T. D&T is kind of back in the modern zeitgeist now just because of
Look,
Stranger
Bob
Things.
deserved better.
Yeah. And I see this as a great game for those who aren't gamers. You know, Wizards came out with they have two versions. They have a starter set, and then they have, I can't remember the name of the other one.
And you sent me the starter set.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to go all in. And of course that lasted.
That's what, there we go.
Yeah, that's what you did. In fact, you didn't even tell me. You're like, something's on the way, and it was like winter, which is perfect time. And you sent me the starter set, and there was some stuff in there that I didn't want or need, of course. But it was a starter set, and it was so clean and so inviting. It's like, oh yeah, I think I want to play. I mean, you know me. I I don't buy a lot of anything other. I mean, I've got a book issue, but like the D&D, well, role playing books, I have found partly courtesy of you. In fact, did I tell you I just picked up another Edge of the Empire?
I think you posted something about
Okay. Oh yeah, that's right. I posted.
Yeah.
I'm still pleased with that one. I haven't used it yet. Okay. Let me ask you a question, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
So 1E to 5E, and listeners, I'm going to preface with, I don't have any insight or even educated ideas, but I think maybe Brad does. So I've read, I don't remember where I've read it. I've read online in the threads somewhere a few people asking, well, what comes next? Isn't 5E due for an update? I personally don't think so. I think given that we're talking about a 40, almost 7-year-old game that's only on the 5th edition, that's better than most textbooks. But that said, at some point, there's going to be a 6E. And I don't know that you and I have ever talked about that, maybe more than like once, and I wasn't even playing it yet. So I'm gonna mute myself here because I'm turning this over to you. I'm curious if, and not to put you on the spot, but what do you think, and or what would you like to see? So what do you think we'll see? What would you like to see in a possible 6E? Let's say that they come out with one, that Wizards puts out 6E in 3 to 5 years. Any thoughts about where that could or should go?
So I'll backtrack. We know that 4E created a real, it was a very, very, I can't think of the word for it, but it caused a lot of consternation with some. Others thought that they were trying to, in effect, create World of Warcraft within D&D. It was a version that some people loved, some people hated, but not a lot of people jumped into it. And that's honestly, if you read, that's how Pathfinder came along. They used the license that Wizards had inherited for 3.3.5, and they broke off because so many people were not going down the 4 path. They came out with 5 after play tests, right? They've issued a number of adventure, or in effect, like adventure paths, the Pathfinder term for it. For 5e, we just got Tasha's Cauldron. I have not read anything about a 6e yet, but like you said, they're going to it's commercial. We're going to reach a point commercially where they're going to look at it. What I will find interesting though is last year, 2020. So for those of you who are listening to this at some point in the future, it's 2021 now. So 2020 was last year, the pandemic year. They saw an increase in this. Amazon saw an increase in gaming books and RPGs, because that's how people were, like Jason and I here, remotely talking over camera and doing this. I'm surprised we didn't start this last year. I think there were just too many other things, mostly on my end, going on. But we accelerated. I talk about this with work because I work in a world where where it was affected indirectly but directly affected by the idea of virtualizing last year and sharing of information and all that. I think we accelerated by 5 to 7 years the integration of this type of work and school and all that into our culture. And I think the gaming thing is a big deal. Remember when Roll20 came out, Roll20, the website where you could play virtually with maps and things like that. Look what people have done in the past 12 months to be able to play virtually. And because 5e, you can go out and watch Vin Diesel or Stephen Colbert or Joe Manganiello or others play the game. Cool people, air quote, playing the game. We've plus Stranger Things and these other sites or other things that trigger it. I don't know if we're even close to being done with 5e yet. I think obviously we know with other companies they in effect laid off their writers and are in effect using contract writers or groups, kind of like Acquisitions Incorporated came out with their book. They in effect did a lot of the writing and then it was published under the Wizards banner.
And we had talked about this, I think, a couple of years ago, and you had said this to me of watch what's happening. This is shifting. And on that note, and I can't remember with whom the interview was recorded, but someone or ones through D&D, maybe it was on the Dragon Talk. I don't know, but they said, or maybe I read it on their blog. That's probably what it was, that their roadmap, I think, might be scheduled for the next few years at least with these supplementary source books.
Yeah, I see because 4E created such an issue, and they took the time to build an edition plus the environment and the culture changed. Personally, for me, I have no inside info, obviously. I just think that we're going to see 5e for a while. As to your original question, which I completely digressed from, I honestly haven't thought about what 6e would be. I mean, unless they went down some additional path, I can't imagine them changing the D20 mechanic. If they do that, I think that would cause a huge issue. So you won't see a lot of dice-related FFG type of mechanic work. No one's going to go out and buy additional dice to play D&D. They might have additional dice for other games. Again, opinion only. But yeah. I just don't see it happening. I don't know what your thoughts are.
I don't have educated thoughts. I mean, that's just the reality, guys. I don't know enough about it. It's just a little bit I've been able to read, but I would tend to agree with you, Brad. Maybe just selfishly because I think the 5e system is so refined at this point, the dice mechanics specifically. I also think, well, like you said, it's a little bit of Spaceballs 2, the search for more money. These are still businesses, and the source books, from what I have read, and maybe it's hype, but from what I've read, they all sell well. And I really do think they all sell well. And, well, for example, Wizards is now putting out an infrequent writers developers blog on D&D 5e. And there have only been, I think, a few posts, but one of the recent ones addressed how they incorporated, I think it's Ravenloft. That's the one. You're right. That's the most recent one, the Lovecraftian. Okay, and so what I liked is they wrote. I don't remember who it was. One of the developers or team leads wrote about we asked ourselves the question. There's a real desire for Lovecraftian horror among our user base. It sounds like tech, but it is. It's just a different kind of tech. Among our user base, how do we turn D&D Lovecraftian, because it's really not its thing? And then he wrote this very long blog about this is how we tried to do it so that it worked for various people. And I say this because I wonder, I don't know enough to suspect, I wonder if we're going to see more of that and more crossovers. Like we've had those little hints, like you said, like the Stranger Things. But I just saw post or something today on, I think it was in Polygon, on the card set for Magic, which is a wizard's product. Um, the card set is going to, oh, that's what it was. It's going to loop over to Warhammer 40,000 or something ridiculous like that. Now, guys, I might be misquoting.
No.
I
But
only
you know that I don't play Magic. Jason
no
doesn't play
no
Magic. Never got into the cards. If that's your thing, great. Just never got into cards. Is it Ravenica?
Ravnica.
Ravnica.
Mhm.
Yeah, that was the first crossover between Magic and D&D.
Right, and I think we're maybe going to see more of that.
I thought there was another book coming out that, and I might be wrong.
Maybe they're
Someone can
hinting at
correct
it.
me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought I read somewhere that they're going to continue that, and they might be going down the same path again with these crossovers between systems. And it's actually a brilliant idea from a business perspective, because you are in effect, oh, now I got to try Warhammer, or no, now I got to, I'm not going to play, or look at D&D has miniatures and Warhammer has miniatures. And again, not judging the company, it's just, I think from a business perspective, a brilliant move. I will, and this might be a brainstorm topic. You're going to hear us brainstorm out loud here. This might be a discussion for another time, but I'd be fascinated by your opinion. This idea of us having gone completely virtual in 2020, and this idea of virtual gaming, is there also an air quote analog component to it, with everybody sitting on their computer, everybody typing and working on their computer? When it comes right down to it, you can still play, and we do play Dungeons and Dragons on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's an analog, imaginative process, and this tech, for most people, I think, is simply the platform.
Yeah.
It's we take the phone for granted, how quaint, right? But I mean, you and I are both old enough to remember ancient rotary telephones. When I was little, my parents still had one downstairs, probably because it was still being given out by Bell, right? It was free. And to my girls, it's like, why would a phone even plug into a wall or have an obvious antenna? But the point is exactly what you're saying, Brad, that these are all digital, those weren't, but these are all technologies, digital or otherwise, that maybe allow us to meet that need for human expression, connection, imagination, expansion of giving ourselves some freedom to play, to see ourselves through a different lens. And I really do think that the explosion of gaming, of tabletop RPGing specifically during the pandemic, was a beautiful, wonderful example of that. Not all that different than Microsoft for how many years having the default desktop of a rolling green bucolic field. These are all tools and wonderful tools. You and I can sit across a few hundred miles and almost be together in this shared room. I mean, in fact, yours even looks messier than mine, so it's like we're in college again.
Hopefully,
Though, in all fairness, it's not bad. It's not bad, but
no. But hopefully, Angela turn it off now if my wife is listening. But yeah,
it looks great, super clean.
Yeah, compared to college, yes, college was a
that was an unfortunate situation.
Yeah, well, yes and no. You and I wouldn't be talking if I hadn't have been there. But
so take it as you will.
Yeah, exactly. I'll wrap up. I'll wrap up talking. I think the whole idea of an analog system and playing this, when Jason and I play, I don't want to over dramatize or overstate it, but we are using a canned adventure for D&D. Now, I will say, since I'm never going to publish this adventure, I am doing a little bit of plagiarizing from other systems.
Hashtag please don't sue him.
Yeah. So I won't say which ones because I don't want it. But the adventure we have is taking some pieces from novels and systems, or really more novels and stories and adventures.
If you tell me which, it will help me prepare for our next
that's
session.
Exactly why I'm not going to say it out loud. But that really sitting down and creating a map and writing all this backstory and then starting the adventure, and I'll try to keep this short, really changed me because we started doing this right before the pandemic hit. In 2019, I think we started playing, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and infrequently we didn't really pick up
Yeah.
until the pandemic. Yeah.
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 And I spent, because I wanted to make sure it was realistic, I spent a lot of time generating this background of philosophy and faith and culture, more so than I thought I would. I latched onto this idea of an analog system and creativity because I don't necessarily work every day in a creative environment like many of you may.
Yeah, there were times when you had the time but you couldn't play because you'd say I mean essentially I'm not done world building.
Yeah.
I'm not ready.
Well, and I was just talking to you this week about this is that I have to adjust my DMing a bit because it has become very cerebral, and the adventure has become cerebral at the expense of adventure. So I made some changes to what's upcoming when we play again, which is hopefully after we both have some time to take care of things during the summer, family vacations, and so on. I believe that it's going to change, but just the idea of sitting down and coming to that realization that I was being, there was too much philosophy and not enough just slash and, you know, hack and slash. I tried to find a little bit more of a, I tried to even them out a little bit. That alone, just taking that time, was outstanding, and hopefully you don't hear my dog in the background. If not,
Think of it as a familiar.
Yeah,
Since we're
yes,
on
there we
DMG.
go. That's my my magical beast. So
That's his
that
+2 puppy.
yeah, there we go. So that being said, you know, I'll finish. But the point is that the idea of the work that I did as a DM, who had never done this before, and the time I put in myself. Again, I'm not saying this to over. It's just I went from zero to something, and the fact that I was able to be creative like that because I have not scratched that itch for years, and I originally went to college to be in the arts, was fascinating to me.
And 5e, I think, provides a really, really good on-ramp for
Oh yeah.
doing that.
And I think the more people catch on to it, they don't have to go down a major path. This is a game. I'm not trying to sell it for Wizards, but comparing it between 1 and 5, I became more appreciative of 5 and aficionado of what they've done over the years.
Yeah, I never thought I would be. Well, I never thought I'd be playing Pathfinder. I never thought I'd be playing D&D, and I love playing D&D. I love playing D&D with you. It's such a great game. That said, what do you think about wandering over to the GM corner and maybe give a little heads up to the listeners in terms of what's coming over the next, we'll see, probably few episodes.
I'll try to, because there's some items that I think you should tease that we've talked about. But I picked up the second edition core rulebook for Pathfinder. I have read a lot out on Reddit and other sites. It has obviously become a flashpoint for many who have played Pathfinder because it's like what you saw with D&D going from 3 to 4 to 5. It's the same thing. It's just going from 1 to 2. They made enough changes for multiple reasons, for multiple things. I had to take a look and read it. So I think an upcoming episode is we're going to talk about the Pathfinder system, the first edition, because that's what really started to get us into doing this together.
Yeah.
And then talk a bit about second edition. And I was telling Jason today I need some time because I have to read and soak the material a bit. On the flip side, there's another thing that we're working on that, Jason, you got a head start on, that I'll let you tease here in a second. But I think we're going to pause in talking about games after this episode in terms of a episode or two on a specific game. And we're going to start talking about philosophy slash faith, economics, morality, and how each of the games we've talked about and games we haven't yet had a discussion on, how those, how what's most realistic? How do each of those games play into it? We talked about Star Trek and faith, for example, with DS9. We're going to talk about economics, and how do each game system handle that? So I think you're going to see some episodes coming up. They're going to cover topics, and then I'm going to swing it over because this is the one we've kind of been teasing, and I think we're going to be sooner or later ready to do an initial episode.
Now, okay, so the listeners by now know that you've been teasing this. You have not been able to stay silent on this for how many episodes, which is great because it's getting us both enthused. So what can we say here? Brad and I have been talking since before the inception of the podcast. So late winter, we started playing with the notion of, wouldn't it be fun to create a game, a system, or at least apply or port one to Star Trek? That's no disrespect to Modifius and the Star Trek Adventures platform. We think highly of that. It's really beautiful quality material, and we intend to continue to be inspired by it. That said, I think for you and me, Brad, the 2D20 system just doesn't resonate with us. It's again, it's no diss on the system. It doesn't fit for us. So, okay, full disclosure, and Brad knows this and at least indulges it. I can be a tad, I'm going to say this, and I'd say if my wife ever hears this, it'll give her too much, but let's face it, my wife is never going to hear this. Neither is yours. So I can be a tad compulsive when I get into something, and upfront, it's really important to me to really get a sense of whatever it is. And this is true academically, this is true personally, this is true role playing. And even as a kid, when I was learning the D6 system for Star Wars and GURPS came out and some of the other Steve Jackson stuff came out, I, air quotes, created a few systems like the rarely mentioned Yukon 2061 that I think I convinced, I don't think you've ever even heard that. Brad's like, what? That I think I convinced / made our friend Brian play once. There was a television show on at the time. It did not catch on, needless to say, but I was exploring ways to port that system to other things because it was Star Wars. I have, toward that end, a year ago or more, I tried to take the Fate accelerated system and put that into Star Trek, and I would hound Brad and Brian with it, and I knew it wasn't a good system because they'd be like, oh, that's neat, and it just didn't resonate. I hadn't looked at the Genesis system. So that said, this is going to scratch my itch and Brad's itch. We have committed to ourselves over the coming, what did we say, Brad? Year? We're not going to rush it.
Year.
We've got families, we've got jobs. We have other responsibilities, but slowly and surely, we are going to seek to develop for our own shizzles and gizzles a full-fledged game for Star Trek using the Genesis system, relying on the core rulebook. And I'm just going to say it, although it's not limited to this, we are going to be talking about primarily a focus on the 2370s into the 24-aughts, because that's where we live. It doesn't mean it won't port beautifully elsewhere, but for us, it's going to be TNG, DS9, Voyager, Picard. That's going to be our headspace, right? To play with this, and so we're probably moving forward. I don't know, Brad. You can tell me if I'm being too optimistic. At least in a couple episodes, we're probably going to start to shift our GM corner to giving you updates and insights into the progress we're making.
Yeah, you and I talked tonight about this. I think we're going to do an episode that intros and talks through the idea of porting Star Trek into the Genesis system. Let's be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
We've been playing the D20 system with D&D. We've played the FFG system with Star Wars. We're applying a system that you obviously know and I'm getting to know.
Yeah.
So it seemed only natural just by the nature, like what I was mentioning with FFG. It's a very unique system. Nothing against anything else there. It's just very unique. We have Star Wars. Star Trek seems a natural way of, or a natural progression in terms of trying to do that. And I am with you on the fact that we're going to play within the time realm where we have a lot of source material.
Right.
We don't have a lot of source material from Future Discovery. We don't have a ton of material yet beyond what we've seen in season 1 in Picard.
No.
So, but we have a lot of material going back.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to stay in that window, that window where we really lived with the television series.
And it will all be canon. That's the challenge before us, right? That we are going to seek to apply a specific mechanic to the actual canon, because I think both of us feel pretty strongly about that in general with things.
Yeah, I played Star Trek Online for a time. I liked the game, had a lot of fun. It wasn't canon. Stopped playing because it wasn't canon. We need to keep it within canon. So you will see an episode forthcoming that will talk about the initial thoughts on this, and you've actually put some time and effort into this already, more than I have. Well,
just a little, yeah.
Yeah, you have, and then we'll talk about we'll update you on the progression of it. This is not, again, like Jason said, going to be a short-term project, because ultimately we want to build a system that we can continue to play and in the future, and then adapt as we get more material that comes in from additional series or material that may come out for us that's Trek related.
And it has to come, even like the Eagle Moss starships of the Federation. I told you when I saw that they are releasing a revision to the second Federation starship book, it's like, oh God, just take my money now. Because it's updated through Picard, and we think those guys, and we're using guys here non-gendered, but we think those guys talk to the guys at CBS Viacom, and they know a lot more than we do, and that's canon source material, or as close as you can get.
Well, and if you haven't watched Picard, highly recommend it. At the end of the season, toward the end, close to the end of the season finale, you see, I'm going to be overly simplistic, you see a lot of Federation starships appear at once.
Oh man.
And what hopefully the guide will talk about is there is a similarity amongst those ships that we really hadn't seen as much in prior episodes.
Yeah, you're the one who caught this.
Yeah. So I'm going to leave it at that. I would highly recommend watching Picard and seeing that all the way through.
Yeah.
You get to see some folks that you haven't seen in a while. It's a phenomenal show.
So good.
And just in your head, if you're not a huge fan of TNG and all that, watch it with the idea that you're heading toward that final episode, because that final episode is so good.
And also, the update is going to have the California class, because Lower Decks is part of this. Oh, and so... Wow. So we're gonna stop it here. I'm gonna turn it over to Brad to close this, because we're about to jump into another 2-hour rabbit hole. We can't do that, you guys.
Yeah, this is probably one of our longer episodes, but we will be progressing. We're gonna start talking about themes and how games fit into themes in coming episodes. We're gonna have an episode about what we just talked about. I still have to record and finalize an episode with a friend of mine who is a professional musician and professional teacher, someone who I played online with, but has some unique perspectives on games. So we have a lot of material ahead, and I'm gonna run this just a little long because I think it deserves being plugged, and I know that the gentleman on the other side of the screen won't do it. There was an article published on StarTrek.com, and it was published by my partner in this podcast. What was the name of the article? Oh,
Lessons from the Ready Room.
Yes.
Thank you, my friend. That another friend and I, a fellow professor at a different university, and I wrote and had the great good fortune to have just that little formal connection to Trek now. Lessons, leadership lessons, if you will, from the Ready Room, that was published on June 16. So this will be
Of
a
2021.
of 2021. Thank you. This will be a good month before this episode drops, but as we record, it's a week and a half, and rarely have I been this gratified at getting some little piece of work out there. But this one tickles me to know. So okay, so it's kind of you to bring it up.
But this is, and then I'll wrap it up. I promise. When I got my master's degree, I did it in management and, in effect, in leadership and ethics. So for me to read that article, even as someone who is a Trek fan, if I can tell you this as someone who works in the business world, no matter what vertical it is, if you are involved with leadership as a leader or working with leaders, which means it's pretty much everyone, I'm not plugging this. Jason doesn't know us. I'm not plugging this because he's staring at me on the screen. I'm saying it's really a well done article. It is well worth a read. Whether you're a Trek fan or whether you watch some episodes, the underlying themes are universal. But at the end of it, I didn't know this. At the end of it, Jason indicated the podcast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And what I've noticed over the past couple of weeks is our follows on Instagram and all that. I'm telling you, they've gone through the roof. We're starting to see some traction.
I mean, I don't know about the roof. We now have more like 4 or 5 people listening than 2 or 3, but hopefully it helped. No, I really appreciate that, my friend. That's kind of you to say. We'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, please, because I think it's really a good read, whether you are if you're a role player and whether you're a Star Trek fan or not. And so I was excited. I knew that you were working on it, obviously. And when you let me know, I hit it right away, and I actually PDF'd it so I could keep it in my leadership notes. So, all right, I'm going to. I think I talked more this episode than I probably. The episode feels different, my friend, today because we're actually looking at each other while we're talking, so it feels more dynamic.
Because our listeners don't know that because of. And we talked about this a bit with the last episode. And again, apologies, guys, because I know it was glitchy. Until what is today? Thursday. So up until 4 days ago, I was powering through the pandemic all of our devices, a family of 4 on an Apple Airport Express router, circa 2010 to 2012.
Go look it up. Seriously, folks, go look it up.
It is a testament to engineering. And I was doing that where in our house where it couldn't even reach the extremes of the 2 ends of the house, and it's not that big of a house. And behind that router was a modem connected to a nearly 1 gigabit up-down fiber optic stream. So why not wait until the very end of the pandemic and summer break for the family to finally replace with a mesh system, as Brad said, that is actually rated, I think, for like 3.2 gigabit up and down. So like before, and we're just geeking out, sorry guys, before we started recording, while we were on Zoom chatting face to face in glorious color, I actually did speed tests on my phone and my MacBook Pro, and I mean, it's finger of God stuff coming through, or I should say coming over the waves. Anyways, yeah, I agree with you, Brad. It does have a different feel. And I think part of it is that we can see each other again.
I'll tease a little bit that in the past couple of weeks, and we don't need to get into detail. The past couple of weeks, you've jumped ahead technologically in areas that I just would never have expected.
I gotta stop buying stuff. I realize it's all like mission critical stuff. I have prevented myself from buying the Pathfinder 2 guide because I never told you this. A week ago, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna sell my Pathfinder books because we're going to talk about them, but I'm not going to play again in all likelihood because I'm just going to keep you with D&D. But you've been talking a lot about number 2, and it's like, well,
second,
I do
let's qualify.
I'm
second edition.
As soon as I said that, I realized that hits too close to home for you.
Yeah.
And so second edition, and it's like, well, I do have to do my research, my due diligence. I just can't. I've got to at least make it another week before I buy anything more.
Yeah, and I completely agree.
Because you're not doing a whole lot less. I bought 1, you bought 2. We're just gonna leave it there.
Yeah, we're gonna hold off. We've made some bigger, nothing like Bond or bail, but we just made some bigger purchases recently.
No, we're still recording from prison. But yeah. Look, listeners, it's always good to talk to you guys, and thanks for indulging us. We're glad that we are glitch free. Any glitches tonight were strictly in our discussion. Buckle up, because as Brad said, in the really long lead out, which is our want, let's face it, we have a lot on the books around interviews because we want to do more of those. We have some lined up. Little stuff for now, bigger stuff we hope in the future around our Star Trek game, around Pathfinder, around philosophy and ethics and religion and all of this stuff. It's going to be a great second half of 2021. Be well, stay healthy. Please drop us a line. The best thing, as always, you can do for us is to give us 5 stars, any rating, give us a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you pod your casts, and take care. We'll see you soon.